Most of the comments I've gotten about fixing lawnmowers center around the idea that they're pretty easy to fix. Most only need a simple carb cleaning and maybe an air filter and it'll start up and run. But what happens when they're not that simple and instead you get something, for a lack of a better term, has a personality? What then? If you don't know what I'm talking about, then you're in for a real treat, because this one is a real head scratcher. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this Troy-Bilt lawnmower, and the problem is that in the last video, we were able to get this mower cleaned up and running again. But during the final test run of the day, we had a very leaky carb on our hands, and before we go on, we'll need to fix it. Now, I'm going to try and repair this lawnmower, but yours might be different, so this might not work on yours. So if things are not working out for you, like in the video, please ask about it, and I'll be glad to answer your questions. Now, at the end of the last video, we had to decide on how we were going to fix this mower. And from most of the comments that we got, it seemed that just ordering a new carb was the easier way to fix it. But to be honest, the choice to go back into the carb was a very close second, so we might still give it a try later on. So here's the new carb, and yes, as usual, I tried to order the cheapest one I could find because, let's face it, money doesn't grow on trees. What that means is that this only has the carb and the gaskets for it, which is really the only thing we care about. I typically try not to order the kits that have all the extras like a spark plug, fuel, and air filter. Now, it may seem like you're getting a really good deal by getting all that extra stuff, but it's only a good deal if you need them. And if you don't need them, then you're just wasting your money. Now, in my case, I would eventually use those for other projects though. But I've already got most of these extra parts on hand anyway. Next, we'll be taking off the old carb and setting it aside so we can install the new one. Now, this would have been a great time to replace the fuel line if it's showing any signs of wear on it. Now, just remember to remove the old O-ring and replace it with the new one from the kit. And if you don't change it, you risk getting an air leak between the carb and the intake pipe, and this could cause the engine to have a starting or running problem. Now, this is important later on, that's why I have to mention it now. Now, some of the comments I get are from viewers trying to repair their carbs with little to no success. And when this happens, my advice to even myself is to avoid a headache and just replace the carb. The reason why is because you've got better things to do than to struggle with a carb that's having a tough time being cleaned. Now, I know this is a new carb, but there's still a chance that it might leak, so to keep from making a huge mess, only pour in a small amount of fuel in the tank first. Now, this might take a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes, but once you're certain that the new carb is not going to leak, then you can add all the fuel to the tank you want. We'll then finish installing the rest of the intake system and then move on to something that we didn't fix in the last video. Now, most consumers never think about wheel maintenance, and to be honest, it really doesn't matter to them. But if you want your mower to last a decade or even more, then you might consider doing this kind of maintenance at least once a year. Now, most often, the non-driven wheels don't have any real problems, so taking them off, cleaning the axle, and applying some lube to it isn't that difficult to do. This one wasn't that bad, so wiping off the dirt was all that was needed before adding your choice of lubricants. So yes, you can add too much lubricant, but if you do, just wipe away what gets thrown out after you push the mower around. So you don't need to take the wheel off, especially if it's already spinning well, but for the first time, I'd recommend it. Now, that wheel was a breeze, and the reason why I mention it is because it's the exact opposite situation for the next one we have to look at. So this wheel is tough to turn. You really need to force it to make it turn, which can only mean one thing: the axle and steel insert needs to be cleaned. Now, the problem is that when a wheel gets to be like this, taking them off the mower to clean it can be really tricky. Now, you can use whatever kind of spray to help out, but sometimes if it's really bad, you may have to get physical with it. So in this case, I had to put the nut back on the axle and give it a couple light taps to get it started. Then if you're lucky, you'll be able to work the wheel off the axle. However, if you're not lucky, things will be exceedingly tough from then on. So as you can tell, the steel insert wanted to come out of the wheel, but with enough spraying, it was able to stay in there. Of course, we'll have to persuade the insert back into the wheel, and then we'll see if we have better luck with the other drive wheel. So I'm using brake cleaner because I don't normally stock penetrating sprays, but as you can see, it seems to work just as well. And if you don't have any brake cleaner on hand, just use whatever you have, just don't try to remove the wheel without some kind of help. So as you can tell, there's quite a lot of buildup on the axle, and even though this wheel wasn't as bad as the other one, we'll need to clean it just the same way. Just for good measure, I'm also going to buff it with an abrasive pad to try and get rid of any stubborn parts. And once I think it's clean enough, I'll then give it one more spray of cleaner, then apply a generous amount of grease to the axle and to the wheel. We also need to push the other insert back into its wheel and then clean the grime off the insert the best we can with the brush and a whole lot of brake cleaner. I will let you know that a can of brake cleaner is a lot cheaper than replacing one of these wheels. But after that last bit of cleaning, you can see just how much stuff came off the insert. Now, if you do this type of cleaning once a year, it should never get this bad. In the case of this mower, it looks like it's never been done in its lifetime. Now, you can use any type of lubricant you have on hand. You do not need to go out and buy what I'm using. But I will let you know there are pros and cons for the different types of lubes you can use. But there is one other option. If you just want to clean the axle and not apply any lubricants to it, that is totally your choice to make. Now, on this particular drive system, the drive gears have the ability to bypass the transmission, meaning you can turn the gear one way and it'll turn the transmission, but if you turn it the other way, it'll turn independently from it. How it's able to do this is the use of a pin that's located behind the gear that needs to be lubricated from time to time. But there is a problem. The bolt that holds the gear has a lot of thread locker on it and requires you to hold the drive shaft to take it out. Now, if the gear is not bypassing at all, then I would take off the gear to have a look at the pin. But if they're still bypassing it like these are, then spraying a thin lube around the gear should be enough to get to the pin to lubricate it. Now, this is not a perfect solution, but it's better than nothing at all. So I'm going to shift gears for a minute to let that lubricant get to the pins, and in the meantime, I'll replace the oil that we took out in the last video. Now, the only thing you have to remember is that with the type of oiling systems these little engines have, too much oil is almost as bad as not enough. So just take your time and pour in a little at a time and check it frequently, or measure out the amount you need to pour into the machine and check it at least once. Next, we'll put the front wheels back onto the mower, and I'm pretty certain they're going to spin a whole lot better than before the cleaning. So once the wheels are back on the mower, what you're going to notice is that if you spin the wheel backwards, you should hear the transmission turning with it. You'll know that it is because there's going to be some resistance when you spin the wheel. However, if you spin the wheel the other direction, it should be a lot easier to spin because the pin will disengage the gear from the transmission. I will let you know that not all front-wheel drive systems are like this one. Some do not disengage because they don't have a pin behind the gear. Now, because of the stuck front wheel, doing a pull test before fixing it was not going to happen. But with the wheel fixed and spinning, we're now able to do a pull test. So for a mower with self-propel, I'd like to see a reading between 2 and 2.5 kilograms. So with a reading of 2.53 kilograms, that's right where I expect it to be, meaning the cleaning worked out just as well as it could have. So there's only a couple of items left to take care of before we try starting the engine, one of which is to install the balanced and sharpened blade. Also, I should have done this before replacing the air filter, but we also need to make sure that the primer is working like it should. So when pressing on the primer, it'll force air into the carb and fuel should come up into the inlet, which it does. Now, if yours is not doing this, the gasket between the carb and the air filter base might be leaking air and needs to be replaced. The other possibility is that the air was leaking from the gasket for the fuel bowl. So it started up with no problems, which is great news, but how will it start when the engine is hot? So unfortunately, it did not start back up, which is quite weird since we have a new carb on it. Next, I'll try pressing on the primer again and see if it'll start then. Well, that's really strange. It didn't start back up unless it was primed again. So my guess is that there's something wrong with that cheap aftermarket carb that I bought. So what I did was to go back through the old carb and install a new needle seat to take care of that leaking issue. I also installed a new air filter and even swapped in a different spark plug from a working engine just as a test. So it's been running for several minutes and it should be good and hot. Let's see what happens now. So it didn't start yet again. Now I'm beginning to think there might be an ignition coil problem. But I do at least want to prime the engine again and see if it'll start back up. So the fact that it started back up after priming it again tells me it is not an ignition issue, but something to do with the fuel. There's just one problem. That's impossible because it's having the same problem with two different carbs, a new one and an old one. What this tells me is that it's not the carb that's the problem, but something with the engine instead. So this is when things get a little tricky because this could be as simple as a leaking gasket to something as complex as piston ring wear. And fixing either could take a lot more time to fix, not to mention a lot more money as well. This is when we have to decide on what to do. Go back into the engine and start looking for leaking gaskets and seals, or do a leak down test or compression test only to find out that it's something not worth fixing and it's best to leave it the way that it is and just keep priming it every time you want to start it. I of course want to fix it and make it start and run like it should, but sometimes you have to realize that may not be something you can do and get your money back out of it as well. Now we still have some more work to do to the engine, and something that I've neglected to do is a compression test, so there's still a chance that we might be able to save it. So my question is, what do you think I should do with it? Leave it alone and try to sell it the way that it is? Or do you think I should give it one more try and do a compression test and maybe look for leaking gaskets instead? Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.